When the email landed on Eleanor Finch's desk at 3 in the morning, the building on Fleet Street still hummed from the day's headlines. She read it once, then again, the lines folding into one another like a seam that would not hold. The subject was dry. PR risks, advisory note. But the text within felt like a match struck in a dry room. Since it is an unambiguous objective of the Daily Mail and Mail on Sunday to take down Prince Andrew, it is disastrous for you to be seen in any way to facilitate his lifestyle or to help with his well-documented issues. Their sole interest in you and Ghislaine is as a means to attack Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson. Eleanor had chased stories that set the city alight. She had spent the decade watching reputations corrode, one revelation at a time. But this was different. The name at the center of the note, Andrew, was the kind of figure who refracted attention like sunlight through glass. The email suggested a strategy of containment, of distancing and damage limitation, but its bluntness hinted at something deeper: fear. By dawn, the newsroom smelled of coffee and apprehension. Eleanor placed a call to an old contact at Osborne and Partners LLP, the advisory firm named in the note. The line was terse. "We can confirm an advisory was drafted in 2011, the contact said, voice measured. It was intended as internal counsel. We've no comment beyond that." The paper moved as if pulled by a tide. Headlines took shape as the editorial staff argued whether to lead with the resurfaced email or bury it beneath the broader sweep of scandal. The photograph of a smiling couple, Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, was already a cultural artifact, cropped and recropped into 1,000 histories. The email suggested that, long before the loud accusations and television specials, someone had seen a pattern in the press and tried to protect the couple by urging a dangerous distance. Eleanor began to imagine scenes she had not witnessed. A private office in Mayfair townhouse, the advisor's pen pausing as the clause was written. A businessman, Jeffrey, receiving counsel that read like a quarantine order. Stay away, for your own safety. Jeffrey Epstein, the name connected in the memo to Ghislaine and the prince, was a man who occupied the kind of headlines Eleanor's editors devoured. For readers, his story was a mosaic of questions: optics and circle, flight logs and late-night dinners. For the palace, the advisory noted, he had become a liability by association. For Jeffrey himself, the advice, if he had ever read it, might well have been understood as both a rebuke and an insurance policy. Keep your distance, and perhaps you might keep your life. Eleanor's piece began not as accusation, but as an excavation. She wrote around the edges, gathering the soft lead of memory and the harder metal of documents. Friends of the palace, those who worked sometimes, anonymously, forever behind the chandeliers, recalled the nervousness that crept through corridors when stories like these began to circulate. We had to think about exposure, not simply the headlines, but how the headlines were weaponized. The worry was, if he was seen in the wrong place with the wrong person, it wouldn't just be him, it would be them. In the center of the narrative stood a man who found himself suddenly and awkwardly the subject of counsel. Andrew, Prince, son of the monarch, was a public figure trained for scrutiny. He moved through a life of ceremonial certainty and private complexity. Sarah Ferguson, warm, gregarious, stubborn in the face of gossip, had always seemed, to those who knew her, both resilient and exposed. The advisory placed them in the crosshairs of a media machine that the authors of the note feared would not stop at naming. It would aim to dismantle. You have to understand the psychology of the tabloids. They don't just report a story, they manufacture a narrative. And when they find a motif, they exploit it. The motif named in the email, Jeffrey's proximity to the couple, was an easy target. It fed the tabloids' appetite for scandal and the public's thirst for scandal's resolution. In her story, Eleanor explored how fear translates into instruction. Stay safe, the advisory had written. And in a way, the empire of safety constructed by the palace and its consultants looked less like protection and more like containment. The email framed Jeffrey not simply as a friend or associate, but as a variable to be controlled. The suggestion that the Daily Mail and Mail on Sunday had an unambiguous objective to take down Prince Andrew read like a declaration of war writ in office stationery. The piece split the city's evening conversation. Some readers saw in the memo a brushstroke that explained a diplomatic dance, an attempt to preserve royal dignity by placing distance between the couple and a man whose name had become an anchor of suspicion. Others read blame into the words, a suggestion that those inside those corridors had not only anticipated the intensity of the press, but had tacitly permitted the conditions that would later be stained by headlines. Eleanor's narrative followed the email's aftermath like a river tracing its banks. She imagined scenes she had not witnessed. A Jeffrey alone in his Palm Beach house, the memo folded in his pocket. Did he read it as warning or as slight? Had he been asked to retreat, not because he was violent or guilty, that judgment was for courts and detectives, but because his presence undermined the careful choreography of institution and image? The thought of a man being told not to associate with royalty for his own safety carried with it an implication that public attention could endanger you in ways that transcended reputation. As her story widened, she dug into the personalities that made the tame line between friend and exposure so fraught. The advisors who wrote the note had operated in the liminal world between reputation and reality. Risk assessment, talk track creation, and the slow art of spinning distance. They were technicians of the public face. Their memo read like an instruction manual for social quarantine. The royal household, too, had its scripts, a schedule of appearances, an official line, a buffer of aides who smoothed edges and disposed of shards. But when stories about Jeffrey bloomed, the institution's buffers seemed thin. It's not just about optics, another palace insider told Eleanor. It's about viability. If the public begins to believe the institution is compromised by association, it corrodes the trust that's at the base of everything we do. Outside the marble steps and gilded railings, the tabloids leaned forward. The memo's line about the sole interest in you and Ghislaine read like confirmation of a theory, that the tabloids had found chinks in a royal armor and were polishing them in public view. The Daily Mail and its weekend sibling, the Mail on Sunday, were not neutral chroniclers, but surgical actors intent on a takedown. Eleanor's piece moved from the document to the days after it was written. She reconstructed dinners, she traced guest lists, she described the laughter recorded in grainy photographs, the way in which private warmth could become, in a candid second, evidence. She described the effect on Sarah, the way she would later hold her head as if bracing against the wind of tabloids that turned intimacy into accusation. She imagined Andrew's quiet, the way an outwardly stoic public figure might be undone in private by the centrifugal force of rumor. The public read her story on a Friday. Comments accumulated in the thousands. Some condemned the palace for failure. Some defended the aides, who they said had been attempting to mitigate catastrophe. Yet beneath the partisan noise, there was a quieter conversation about the nature of friendship in the orbit of power. How do people behave when association itself becomes a risk? Is distance a moral duty when it protects not only an institution, but the citizens' faith in that institution? Eleanor's next scenes were darker, told in a different language. She imagined late-night calls to legal counsel. She wrote of operatives in beige coats booking flights and canceling flights. She sketched the practicalities of erasure, photographs removed from albums, invitations rescinded with a pretext of scheduling. There were truths you could not fully erase, she wrote, but appearances could be curated. In the months after the memo surfaced, the narrative shifted. Investigations followed. The public's memory, short, sharp, and unforgiving, demanded clarity. For Jeffrey, the advisory's wording became cruelly ironic. Told to stay away for your own safety, he later faced a very different kind of scrutiny and confinement, and the world that had once been hospitable to him closed its doors more quickly than anyone had predicted. Eleanor did not shy away from complexity. Her account acknowledged the moral fog in which the palace had chosen to operate. There were, she wrote, no easy answers. When a public institution tries to protect itself by severing ties, it can sound like cowardice. When it does not, it can appear complicit. Both images cost the public's trust. We are judged not just by what we do, but by who we let into our rooms. The human dimension of the note lived in small, intimate moments, she described. Sarah standing in a kitchen that no longer felt safe for laughter. Andrew looking at photographs that had become evidence. That the advisory spoke of well-documented issues was the sort of phrase that sanitized pain into bullet points. Eleanor let her prose linger on that hypocrisy, the attempt to reduce wounds to line items on a risk spreadsheet. As the narrative followed the email's ripples, public debate turned toward accountability. Who had written the memo? Was it a discreet, pragmatic counsel or a political instrument meant to create distance for its own sake? Osborne and partners kept its statements minimal, the palace more circumspect. The tabloids argued about motive, the broadsheets about ethics. In the wake of the argument, the story's human toll quietly accumulated. Relationships frayed, parties were rescinded, invitations were rendered null by a shadow that fell across rooms. Eleanor's editor asked her to close with something that could not be summarized by the syntax of legalese. She chose a small scene. A late winter morning, when snow lay thin on the royal gardens, Sarah walked the path alone, a scarf wrapped against the chill, hands clasped as if to hold herself together.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to The Royal Insider.